Welcome to Wanna Be Clutter-Free, formerly Wanna Be Minimalist, the podcast for busy families who are tired of the chaos, fed up with being overwhelmed, and ready to enjoy life again. Each week, we talk about how to let go of the clutter so that you can focus on the things that actually matter. And it's not just physical clutter. We talk about the mental and emotional stuff too, because if it's holding you back, it's time to ditch it. I share what I've done in my own life to declutter, organize, and calm the chaos, but you won't just hear it from me. There are amazing guests too. It's practical, doable, and simple for those of us that want to be clutter-free. You're listening to Wanna Be Minimalist with Deanna Yates, episode number 143. On today's episode, I'm chatting with Kori Tomelden about her life as an ADHD and autism mom. We talk about what these diagnoses have meant for her and her family, and then she shares her amazing advice for overcoming mom guilt, transitioning to new routines, and how we can declutter and organize our homes no matter what is going on. Well, hello again, my wannabe minimalist friend. Welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for joining me. If this is your first time here, well, then welcome to the show. I am honored to have you. I hope you like what you hear and you come back for more. On today's show, I'm chatting with Kori Tomelden, a woman working to minimize and organize as an ADHD and autistic mom. It's a topic that I have not discussed on the show, so I was really excited to have Kori on and learn from her life and her perspective. I have often had listeners ask me about decluttering with ADHD, and while I can speak to decluttering and organizing in a very distracting world where we feel like we are being pulled in 100 different directions all at once, I felt I needed to have an expert in the field come on to talk more about their experiences, so I am delighted Kori reached out to me about being a guest. We had a wonderful conversation, and I appreciate her being very patient with me as we had some technical difficulties while recording. I'm hoping you don't even notice them, but let me just say that she is a very gracious guest. Kori is a late diagnosed autistic ADHD mom. She is currently located in Albany, New York, where she is raising a neurodiverse family with her partner, Kyle. Her older daughter is non speaking autistic and also has ADHD and anxiety, and her youngest daughter is HSP/gifted. A blogger, podcaster, writer, product creator, and coach, Kori shares neurodivergent family life, the highs, lows, messy, and the real. Give this episode a listen, and when you're done, head over to wannabeclutterfree.com/143 to get the show notes for today's episode with links to Kori's website and all of her resources. Again, you can find it all at wannabeclutterfree.com/the number 143. And now let's get to our conversation. Hi, Kori. Welcome to Wanna Be Minimalist. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Deanna. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. This is going to be a very interesting conversation. I think we're going to get into some topics that we haven't really discussed on the show before. So I am really excited about it. For my listeners, can you please tell us about yourself and how you help busy families?
Sure. Just for a little bit of background, I am a neurodivergent life coach and strategist for moms with ADHD. And I like to call myself a mom mentor for parents of autistic children. The reason that those two areas are separate right now, is just because I wanted to focus a little bit more on supporting moms while still being able to provide support for families of with autistic children, and not just the parents, but also caregivers, teachers, etc. Um, so we have two distinct businesses right now under the one umbrella. One is Autism Family Life, which is all things autism, family, and life. And that is to bridge the gap between school and home for parents and caregivers. And then the other part of it is going to be called ADHD Awakening, which is for moms with ADHD.
That's great. I love that distinction between the two because, right, you could have both worlds, or you could have one world or the other world. So
Mhm.
I love that you have the two differences. And you talk about how you were diagnosed with depression at the age of 14, but you
Mhm.
weren't diagnosed with ADHD and autism until you were 39. So, can you tell us a little bit more about that road and if there's signs that we can look out for ourselves? Because there could be people listening to this that have been misdiagnosed as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was diagnosed with clinical depression at the age of 14. And when I was in grief therapy after losing my dad, my therapist had said, well, that's a really unusual diagnosis for a teenager. It's like, oh, okay. And at that time, I had recently just done quite a bit of research on executive functioning in adults because my autistic daughter, she just recently turned 18. So I wanted to figure out how to better support her as an adult. And as I was researching more into that, so much just started clicking into place for myself. It was just this unfolding of, ah, okay, that's why I do this, or that makes so much sense. So I started doing all of these kind of self assessments for ADHD and sensory processing disorder. Ended up self diagnosing at first with inattentive ADHD, or what used to be called just classic ADD. And I went with that, for a couple of years, but then I've always been in the belief that there's no shame in being on any kind of medication or additional support, whether it's for depression, anxiety, whatever your reasons are. So I decided to seek out a formal diagnosis in case I needed to be on medication. And when I was going into my evaluation, I was pretty convinced that I was going to walk out of there with the inattentive ADHD. And now, as I like to say, I walked out with both the inattentive ADHD and a bonus of autism level one. Let's go. That's new. And then I joked to my current therapist as well. I said, well, I've been diagnosed with depression and autism and ADHD. No one's diagnosed me with anxiety. She's like, oh, I have. It's like, oh, okay, great. I can add that one too. So,
Check it off the bingo card,
yeah,
right?
right. And it's like, okay, all right, let's keep going then. So the biggest thing that I can say, especially with women and females, is that so many of us either get misdiagnosed with depression or anxiety. And sometimes it really is depression or anxiety, but it could also be ADHD. And one of the ways that you're going to start looking for that is, your ability to focus, ability to organize. I would start by just saying, look for signs of inattentive ADHD, because that's the one that women, at least according to most of the research, that's the one that women usually end up diagnosed with. So,
Can you dive into that just a little bit more? What is inattentive ADHD?
okay. So before the DSM-5, which is the big diagnostic manual, came over to version 5, ADHD and ADD, attention deficit disorder, were two different disorders.
Okay.
Now they are the same. They're all classified under ADHD, but there's three subtypes. So
Okay.
inattentive is classic ADD, ADHD is the hyperactive ADHD, and combined type is both inattentive or signs of inattentive and signs of hyperactivity.
Okay, I think that helps.
Yeah.
Um, we were talking a little bit about your children, and I want to make sure that the audience kind of knows a little bit about that story as well, because you have 3 children,
Mhm.
and I wanna know what signs we can look for in our children, and I know with your first 2, it seems like that was a pretty clear-cut case, but with
Mhm.
your 3rd daughter, I wanna know what you're looking for with her as well. So give us the background and tell us the story there.
Sure, sure. So my older two were both premature, and my oldest has a nonverbal learning disorder and ataxic cerebral palsy, which I know sounds kind of scary, but it's really the mildest form of cerebral palsy. And he's graduated from college. He has his bachelor's degree. He has a job, so he's a functioning adult, very functioning adult. My middle daughter is what would be considered classic autistic, and she's non-speaking, so she or what we used to call nonverbal. And my younger daughter is developing neurotypically, but she's, I would say, borderline gifted and highly sensitive.
Mm.
So there's a lot of traits in her that I had noticed in myself as a child. And for parents who might be concerned about that thing, what I would look for are some signs that are very similar to child anxiety. So your child may be a little bit of a perfectionist. They may be a little bit forgetful about just common things. They might be just overly sensitive to loud noises, to certain smells, to certain textures, and things like that, which could also be either sensory processing. And then there's just like some signs of almost boredom, like they just don't look like they're paying attention and
Mm.
there's a lack of focus. And that's where the inattentive type really
Mm.
starts to show up. I could go on about this all day, but it's the executive functioning stuff that comes into play. And also emotional or inability to regulate your emotions.
Mm.
That's one of the other big hallmarks for ADHD people.
Do you think that anything in our modern world is maybe exacerbating the problem? Like, do you think our attachment to phones or social media, our inability, like, I feel like people now don't have the ability for long attention spans. Like, we all have these very short attention spans. Do you think, I mean, I know you're not a doctor. So from a non-medical perspective, it just feels like it's maybe becoming more prevalent. Are we just becoming more aware, or is it something that is maybe gaining,
I think
no,
it's a
I don't know.
combination of
Yeah.
both in that we are in such like an instant gratification society as a
Yeah.
whole. So we just expect for things to happen faster. But there's also just there's more awareness, there's more research, and especially how it presents in women
Mhm.
and females, because with his both ADHD and autism, so much of the research was always about boys and autism in boys and ADHD in boys. So you always had that kind of like stereotypical picture of what ADHD was supposed to look like. It was a
Mhm.
hyperactive boy who just could not sit still, and was always fidgeting and on the go and just all these other things. But I think as more research has come out and more awareness is coming out, that's why I think there's an uptick in
Yeah.
it's just that increased awareness piece. Are all
Yeah.
people, who think they have ADHD, do they have ADHD? Probably not. And the only way you're really gonna know is if you have the diagnosis, process.
I'm Margaret,
And I'm Amy.
and together we host the podcast What Fresh Hell? Laughing in the Face of Motherhood.
Margaret, I would say you're sort of a where are my keys kind of mom.
Correct. Sometimes a where are my kids kind of mom. While you're Amy more of a we were supposed to leave 35 seconds ago, mom.
I mean, touche. In each episode of What Fresh Hell, we come at a topic from our usually completely opposite perspectives. I bring the research,
And I bring kind of the gimlet eye. Like, is that research really going to work, people?
and almost 10 million downloads later, we're still laughing.
We also talk to experts in the parenting field, plus parents with stories we can all learn from.
We make each other laugh, we challenge each other's assumptions, and we have what we think is the best parenting community on the internet.
Check out What Fresh Hell? Laughing in the Face of Motherhood wherever you listen to podcasts.
Right. And I love what you said earlier about we really should not have any stigmas about people reaching out for the help they
Mhm,
need and getting that diagnosis. And again, if you're thinking that you might be anywhere, right? Like have any issues, why not reach out to your doctor? The worry and the scare that you will keep with you is going to make things worse versus just going to the doctor, talking to your therapist, getting the medication that you need, is going
yeah,
to be so much better than living
absolutely.
scared. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely, and that's something that I think just has always frustrated me is that
Mhm.
when it comes to mental health or any kind of, well, these neurodivergences now, people they get scared, and there is still such a stigma around it, and like there really
Yeah,
shouldn't be. I
right. No, I agree with you for sure. So what is the difference? You talk a lot about autism and ADHD, and I think like you said, so much research is coming out, and I think we're moving so quickly through this
Mhm.
that a lot of us that are listening are like, "Okay, I'm so confused now because what I was told, a year, 2, 3, 5 years ago is so different than the information that's
Mhm.
coming out now." And I know we're gonna talk about decluttering, organizing your routines, but before we get there, I wondered if you could help us break down these terms and talk us through ADHD and autism because I know you write about this a lot on your website, so maybe you can help us break them down.
Well, they are very similar. They are
Okay,
very
interesting.
similar because they're both neurological disorders, so they both
Okay.
affect the brain, in but in different ways. The best way that I've ever been able to put it was that having both autism and ADHD is like having both iOS and Android installed on the same phone.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
very similar, you know,
Uh-huh.
similar purposes, but different features. What's and one can exacerbate the other.
Okay.
And then on top of that, they can co occur. So it can be very difficult to pick them apart if they are co occurring. But one of the ways that I've also seen described is that autism is more of a social
Mm,
stunting disorder, in that autistics have a difficult time with social skills and things like that. Whereas ADHD is more on the emotional regulation, and sometimes the executive functioning stuff is a little bit more pronounced.
okay.
But it depends on the individual. Um,
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
it really does. It
Sense.
depends on the individual. And like I said as well, they do kind of walk hand in hand. And when they do, it can be very hard to pick out what is what. Um,
Mm,
so for me though, it's just been one of those things. It's like, all right, I'm not going to look at it as, okay, this is my autism or this is my ADHD. I look for those areas of overlap, and that's how I choose to address it. That's how I
mm,
choose to say, okay, how can I support this right now, whatever that may
interesting.
be.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, for moms that are listening that are thinking that either they hear a lot of themselves or a lot of their children in your descriptions, what would you say? What are some of the first steps that they should take, and who should they reach out to for help?
Um, for their children, I would absolutely suggest pediatrician,
Okay.
and to get a referral for either a developmental pediatrician or for a child psychologist,
Hmm.
because then you can get those referrals in place and you can start a process. Write down and document all of your concerns, even if they seem small, because they are legitimate concerns for you. And don't be too surprised if your child has an evaluation that comes through a school psychologist and is completely different from the one you have at home, because your child is going to behave differently at school than they will at home. It's just how it is, neurotypical or not. For adults, I would say same thing. Just keep looking and do your research. If you start resonating with things even more, then it's worth, I think, bringing up the conversation with either your primary care physician, or if you have a therapist, bring it up with a therapist. And don't be discouraged either if people are just saying, it's like, oh, well, everybody's a little bit, ADHD, or everybody's a little bit this. Like, yeah, not really. Um,
Mm-hmm.
some of us legitimately are, and if it turns out that you aren't, or that your child isn't, okay, great. Then you've at least ruled that out. But you can also still keep looking for ways to support them until you can get to the bottom of whatever it is. And that, I think, is also one of those stigmas with the labeling that with people have.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, this child has ADHD. They're never going to be able to focus and pay attention. It's like, actually, yeah, I can focus. And this was one of those other things that I had heard, is that ADHD is not a lack of being able to focus or lack of focus. It's a lack of being able to control how that
Mm,
focus goes. Uh,
interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. And I love what you said there, right? Like, let's not minimize. Don't take it on and
Mhm.
say, "Oh, well, we're all a little ADHD," and then thus minimize the
Yeah,
actual diagnosis of ADHD, but let's also not have a stigma around it and say, "Okay, no problem. Let's get you the help you need," so
right.
that, there isn't that moment of like us, them, separation, you
Absolutely.
know. Yeah. So, okay. Love that. I want to change topics a little bit
Mhm.
because I know you have some really interesting tips to help busy moms stay organized. And so, what advice do you give to the time crunched moms? Because I mean, honestly, who of us is not a time crunched mom these days? There is so
Yeah.
much going on. So let's talk a little bit about that.
For time crunched moms, I always say start in the margins. So it's just in those pockets of time that you have, and don't feel that you have to get it all done in one day,
Mm-hmm.
because you're not going to. And it's just going to, I don't want to say, don't have any expectations, but set your expectation, be realistic about it. If you only
Mm-hmm.
have 5 minutes here and there to do your cleaning or to do your organizing, use those 5 minutes. That was the best that you could do that day. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's no competition, there's no big disaster that's going to occur if you don't have more than 5 minutes. It's just that that's how much time you have. And
Mhm.
I think that's one of the other big things for women in particular is that we hold these almost unrealistic expectations of ourselves. And because we have such high standards, which there's nothing wrong with that. I have very high standards for myself, but we also need to be very realistic about it. And when we're not being realistic about it and we're not keeping ourselves in check, that just sets up this whole cycle of guilt and shame and it keeps us stuck. So,
Yeah. I absolutely raise my hand. I'm one of
mhm.
those women that suffers from having high
Mhm.
expectations of
Mhm.
myself. I'm a
Mhm.
bit of a perfectionist.
Yep.
There could be all sorts of reasons why, but we're just gonna
Yeah.
not think about that. Just think of what is. And so, yeah, I've had to definitely do that, kind of lessen my expectations. And like you said, not have no expectations, not think that
Mhm.
it's hopeless, not say, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to do anything. So I might not do it. Like, might as well not try. But also, if I have 10 things on my to-do list, I look at myself and go, "Okay, cut it down to your top 3.
Yep.
What's the number 1 you need to get done today? Do that one."
Ex prioritize. Yep.
Yes, the priority because I do that, like, and then I feel bad
Mhm.
about myself, I get totally down.
Oh,
I
yeah.
so,
And
yes.
it spirals. It really does, and it starts
Yeah.
to affect your entire mood when it was who knows, it could have just been something so simple.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Awesome. I love that. Time crunch, 5 minutes, and I'm a big advocate of that too. You can do lots in 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
If you really set the timer, like, and really concentrate, you can really get a lot done. So,
Absolutely.
yes. All right. So, do you have tips for transitioning to a new schedule or a new routine? Because that can be a challenge for a lot of us. It's
It
tough
can.
time.
Um, my best tips as far as that goes, it's the same with the busy mom thing. Don't set your expectations too high,
Okay.
especially if you're starting a brand new routine, and introduce it slowly. Don't put all of the new components in place at once because you need time to adapt to these things. Introduce one or two at a time and tweak those before you move on to another one. So for example, if you're setting up like a cleaning routine for your family, which I think there should be a cleaning routine, um, assign it in bits and make sure that everybody does know what they are expected to do. Set the expectations and state them at the beginning. If it is a family involved kind of thing, involve the whole family because you don't want to have any sort of resentment bubbling up.
Hmm.
Even if you think your kids may not be able to understand, give them the opportunity and the chance to have a voice and just talk about it. Make it a family thing and say and be consistent. That is the biggest thing for any routine or schedule that you're implementing is you need to be consistent. And
Mhm.
that's the only place where I would say is to not let yourself slack. If you can't stick to everything that you outline in this routine, that's fine. Don't expect that to happen. If it does go really, really well, great. Celebrate it and don't start thinking like, oh, well, it went really great. What's going to happen now? Keep going. And if it breaks, it breaks. That's the kind of the beauty of it, because if it breaks, then you can see where you need to tweak it and where it needs to be adjusted. Because if it does start breaking, it means that it might not be working or that you need something just a little bit different.
Yeah. And we have had new routines this year. So
Hmm.
as we kind of get out of the COVID funk and we get
Yep.
all these new activities happening back in, we have had to adjust a lot this year. And so I actually had to write it down and then I actually
Hmm.
had to put it in my phone so that it would
Yep.
remind me
Yes.
because so much goes on during the day and like
Hmm.
you might not expect something to come up. You get an email you didn't expect, something happens, you don't feel well one day, your kid's sick, so it's
Yeah.
like I have to write stuff down because if I don't
Yep.
write it down, I just forget it these days. I can't keep it all. It can't
Yeah.
stay up here in my head.
Yeah.
I cannot do it anymore. Anyway, so
I'm the same way in terms
yeah.
of I have it on my phone because it
Mm,
all syncs up with my
yeah.
Google Calendar, and then I keep my work calendar up during the day so that way I don't miss things because my work calendar and my personal calendar don't always sync as they
Mm,
should. So I know I'll see the notifications on my phone for my personal calendar, but my work calendar I need to keep up so it's
mm,
in, line of sight. And then at the beginning of every day, I have a brain dump of, okay, these are the things that I need to do today because they're on my calendar, they're on my schedule. These are the things I would like to do today.
mhm.
And if I have the time and space in my schedule to do those things, then I put them on my schedule. If I don't, then they just stay in that column of things I would like to do, but they're not necessary. It helps me not get stressed out about
Yeah,
things on my
for
list.
sure.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. And so then how long do you think it takes for a routine to stick? Do you subscribe to a certain timeline?
I think it's more of
Yeah.
a you'll know it's working
Hmm.
kind of thing.
Okay.
Um, I know there's all the research out there about habits and things like that, and the misnomer of it takes 21 days. Not true.
Yeah.
It's more like 70.
Oh.
So I would spend at least give yourself, a month with a
Mhm.
routine because in that month, you have time to see it's like, "Okay, well, here's how it's going during a weekday versus here's how it goes during a weekend."
Mhm.
And, because our schedules are gonna be probably completely different, and you also in that time span of the month, you may have different appointments that come up, your children may have, if they're in sports or if they're in after school activities. So you really get a better sense of time when you have a routine going over the span of a month.
Mhm.
So that helps you to make adjustments as needed. And I would say after that month, reevaluate and see where you are with the routine. If it's going great, great, keep it in place. If you need to make adjustments, make adjustments. If you need to start over, start over. There's no shame in
Yeah.
starting over. It just means that something needs to be fixed.
Right. And also a couple things there. First, on the first half of that month, right? Like when you first start something, if you say, like, I'm going to give this a full month and I'm going to commit to it, then if it's rocky at the beginning, you don't just throw in the towel before
Mhm.
you know whether it's really working or not, right? You could have just had a terrible day, something could have come up, and it's just that you're just adjusting. And so you
Mhm.
have that ickiness of just, ugh, I got to get through this. I don't know exactly what's going to happen type of thing. And
Right.
then, two, on the back end of that, yeah. Once you know it's not working for sure, don't stick with it anymore, right? Give
Yeah.
yourself the ability to say, all right, I'm going to find something that works better for me. So, yeah, I really liked what you said there about
Yeah.
both of those. So,
Absolutely.
well, Corey, what else? Is there anything else you'd like to add for today?
Yeah, it's just be gentle with yourself. We're all human beings. So
Yeah.
just, yeah, be gentle with yourself and just accept sometimes that things are going to happen and we don't always have control. And I know this is tough, but we don't always have control over those things. But what we
Hmm.
do have control over is how we react to them.
Yeah.
So if it's something that you truly can't control, you can't control it, but you can control your own reactions and look at the things that you can control to make the situation bearable, if that's
Hmm.
what it needs to be, and go from there.
So good. All right. Well, I know people are going to want to follow up and find out more about you. So, can you share where people can find you?
Sure. I'm over on Instagram at the Autism Family Life, and I'm going to be launching a new podcast within the next couple of months. It will be called Neurodivergent Adults Adulting. You can find me on YouTube also under Autism Family Life. And my blog is koryathome.com. It's Kori with a K and an I. And I will have my new coaching program, ADHD Awakening, coming out within the next couple of months as well.
Okay, fantastic. We'll put links to all that in the show notes, of course, so people can just click on over and find it. So don't have to worry about spelling or anything like
Yes.
that. And then my favorite way to end these episodes is with three rapid fire questions. And the first one is, what does minimalism mean to you?
Minimalism to me means letting go of unnecessary things, and it doesn't necessarily have to be things that are physical things. Anything.
Yeah,
Just letting go of unnecessary things.
I love that. I'm right there with you. I feel the same way. Number two, what is one of your favorite pieces of advice? Could be about routines, life in general, anything that you'd like to share today.
One of my favorite pieces of advice, have grace, grant yourself grace. And I don't mean that in, a biblical sense. Just be gentle with yourself and just accept sometimes that things aren't always going to go the way you planned, and that's okay.
Yeah. Sometimes those are the most beautiful things. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. And what is making you happy right now or in this season of life?
What is making me happy right now is I'm organizing and decluttering our downstairs. So our living room is finally getting to where we want it to be, and the rest of the house is going to follow. So once we have that
Oh,
one project taken care of, it's like everything else, you see the possibilities. And it's like,
yeah. That one little domino, get that
yep,
first one to fall and the rest kind of just
absolutely.
fall in place. Yeah, I love it. So, oh, well, Kori, thank you so much for joining us today, bringing us a new perspective on the podcast, and just sharing your story and helping and doing what you're doing to help individuals, I think, and families. Families, it's wonderful. So, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you again so much for having me, Deanna. This was absolutely wonderful.
So, what did you think? I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. Kori was so gracious to share her knowledge with us, and I love her tips about routines and setting realistic expectations. I would love to know what stood out the most to you today. Come on over to the Wannabe Minimalist family group on Facebook and share. I love having those conversations over there, and these discussion posts after the podcast can be a lot of fun. And as always, thank you so much for joining me today. If you made it this far, I would be thrilled if you left me a review on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews make my day, and it helps me be able to book more guests on the show for you to discover and learn from. And it also helps me know what resonates with you the most. And special thanks again to Kori for joining us on the show today and for being so gracious, like I said. Remember, you can find out more about Kori by heading over to wannabeclutterfree.com/143. Again, that's wannabeclutterfree.com/143. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you back here next week for a solo show when I will be answering some questions from the members in the Wannabe Minimalist Facebook group. So if you have a question that you want me to answer, make sure you go join the group conversations and then submit your question by Sunday, March 12th for a chance to have it answered on the show. I am looking forward to connecting and chatting with you next week. I'm Deanna Yates, and you've been listening to Wannabe Minimalist. Cheers.